Welcome to Rise Up in Business, the law podcast for small business owners. I'm your host, Tracy Myler-Crane. I'm a business lawyer, an entrepreneur, and very much a realist. Rise Up in Business is designed to share with small business owners important legal information and some clever tips and tricks in short and sharp episodes, no legal jargon. With this podcast, I want to empower small business owners to rise up and take control in their business. I'll be here every Wednesday to tell you what you need to know without sending you to sleep. Let's get into today's episode. Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me on yet another episode of the Rise Up in Business podcast, where I really hope that you're gaining really valuable tips and tricks and some clever information which is designed to help you rise up in your business. Today, in episode 24, I'm going to talk about the really important topic of getting paid in your small business. We all know that starting a small business can be really, really exciting, and often we do so with so much passion and drive that we are convinced beyond all else that this is going to be one of the most successful things we've ever done. Well, at least certainly that's a story that I hear often. And this is fabulous. Small business owners who start their businesses, they see loads of rainbows and really bright futures, and honestly, I hope that that's the case. But let's just stop for a moment, because we need to be honest with ourselves and accept that cash flow is the cornerstone of any small business. And without it, no amount of passion or skill or drive is going to result in us running a viable, let alone profitable, business. So let's talk about getting paid. My view, as you know, with most things that I talk about, is prevention is better than cure. I say it all the time. That applies double here when we're talking about setting ourselves up to get paid. I think that there is no substitute for preparation in just about anything we do in life, particularly in business, and that applies here too. Getting paid is one of the fundamentals that I think business owners need to spend a lot of time on in the early stages to make sure that we've got the proper framework and infrastructure set up so that we can get paid, and so that we can then pull that lever and go out into the world with our small business, provide our magical skills and get paid for them. And the easier we make it for people to pay us, and the easier we make it for ourselves to facilitate that process, the better off we're going to be as business owners. So that all sounds great, but how is it that I think that this little bit of magic can work, this little bit of magical preparation, to set us up for getting paid more easily in business? I'm going to talk about 3 things that I think go to the core or the very heart of this issue. 1 is properly tailored business terms and conditions. 2 is setting up your internal processes and systems. And 3 is having a strategy for dealing with client complaints or issues if and when they arise. So let's just dive into those a little bit deeper. Properly tailored business terms and conditions. If you've listened to previous episodes or if you follow me on social media, terms and conditions is something I talk about a lot, and that's because I believe that they are the core fundamental document in any business. It's probably the most important document you can have. Yes, it can be called different things depending on the nature of your business, but a properly tailored set of terms and conditions for your business is going to set out for you and for your clients those really vital details around what services you will be providing, the fees associated with those services, and the breakdowns. So it'll set out the requirement for deposits or progress payments or payment plans if that's applicable to you. It'll set out your payment terms and your payment methods and a dispute resolution process. If something goes awry, something goes wrong, there's a process in there for dealing with it. But just as I say those things, you can hear that those really are the fundamentals when it comes to your business terms and conditions with your client, because that's the core. The client needs to know what you're providing, and the client needs to know what they're going to pay, how, and when. There can be no confusion. There can be no misaligned expectations in relation to payment if it is all set out crystal clear from the beginning. The next is your internal processes and systems. I'm a huge fan of processes and systems. I systemize everything. I love it. And that doesn't stop just with my business. You can ask my husband to vouch for that. We've got systems and structures and processes for just about everything. But it works, and it means that things more often than not run really smoothly. And we're setting ourselves up for success in our business when we spend the time to set these up from the outset. And what I mean particularly when it comes to getting paid, when I talk about internal processes and systems, is things like the process you have in place, the framework for issuing your proposal or your fee structure or your quote, and having those early conversations with your potential clients. And then issuing your business terms and conditions or your service agreement or whatever you've called it. Critical step here needs to be a process in place to make sure that happens really timely. And from there, we diarise in whatever system you use or whatever framework you use, those key dates for issuing your invoices for, say, initial deposits or progress payments. Dealing with the final invoice stage as well. So having those timeframes really clearly set out somewhere where you can rely on them means that we're not forgetting and we're not delaying. Again, helping with cash flow. Then, of course, we need to set up processes for following up those invoices. And often if you use Xero or MyOb, for example, then that can happen automatically in your system. Other times you might like to have your VA make those calls or send those emails or whatever it might be that works best for your business. If we're doing that, what it means is we're not waiting for 4 weeks, 6 weeks or 8 weeks to realise, oh gosh, we're having cash flow issues here. I wonder why that is. Taking time out of your busy day to trawl back through your invoices and see who has and hasn't paid. It's messy, it's complicated, it's unpleasant, and by that stage you're already suffering, or your business is already suffering, from some cash flow blockages. So the idea of these internal processes and systems is to avoid you needing to do that and to avoid those blockages with cash flow. And then, of course, one of the really important stages in these internal processes and systems relates to closing the work or the project and the finalisation stage. So if you're a creative, it will be issuing your final invoice for payment prior to releasing certain documents or material or codes or whatever it might be. If you're a coach, it might be issuing your final invoice before your last coaching session. Things like that. So we give thought to how that might all work, so that we're not faced with chasing outstanding invoices after we're done and dusted and everything's finished. So that's what I mean by internal processes and systems. And honestly, time and time again, I see the difference in businesses between having these and not having these. It's very real. And the third point I mentioned that I want to talk about is having a strategy for dealing with client complaints or issues. And you might think, no, I'm not really going to think about that. I'll just deal with it when it happens because they can all be so different. And I don't want to think about that now. Well, trust me, based on my experience, you are much better served and much better positioned to deal with client complaints or issues when they arise if you've given some thought in advance to how it is you might approach this. Because when you're not emotional, and when you're not dealing from, let's be honest, a bruised ego because a client has said something about the quality of your work and you found it really offensive, when you're not in that place, it's much easier to think about how it is I'm going to approach it if it happens. And it's just a framework. It's certainly not rigid. Of course, you need to be flexible and adaptive depending on each individual client case. But my real tip here when it comes to thinking about how you're going to approach it is communication. The value of communication should not be underestimated. So if you take the time, for example, to pick up the phone with this client who's become disgruntled for whatever reason, to take a moment to understand the real issue that the client has, you will be in a much better position to address and hopefully resolve it than you would if you sat back and simply assumed that you know what that client really means from this email, or you assume based on your dealings with this client that they feel a particular way. Those assumptions can be a recipe for disaster when you're dealing with dispute resolution and trying to resolve a complaint from a client. So if you're just a little bit clear about what process you're going to engage in if a client has an issue, and it might be a phone call followed up by an email, followed up by a meeting or a Zoom or something like that, And then you can go back and have a look at the actual issue. Is it service related, invoice related? You can distill it really quickly, work out a way forward, and hopefully resolve it as expeditiously as possible. Then again, that's going to help with your cash flow because you've resolved an issue with a client. It hasn't taken you an extraordinary amount of time. You don't feel emotional and caught up on it, which means you are able to stay focused on your business, providing your services and keep things ticking over and progressing really well. So the end result with all of those things, the properly tailored business terms and conditions, the internal processes and systems being set up, and having a strategy in place for dealing with client complaints or issues, the takeaway, the end result, it's going to be real peace of mind in your business, and that is what I'm all about. I do hope that's been helpful to provide some framework around how I say we can make getting paid in our service-based businesses much easier and far more streamlined. As always, if any of this strikes a chord with you, or if you're thinking that perhaps you need a little bit of help to finesse a few things and get some things in place, feel free to reach out. Happy to chat, always here to help. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll catch you next time. That's it for today's episode. Short and sharp, just like I promised. If you liked the episode, please be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss any new episodes, and I would be most grateful if you would leave a review on Apple Podcasts. As always, remember to keep your business legals in order with my annual legal checklist. You can grab your free copy by heading over to my website, tmsolicitor.com.au/checklist. I'll catch you next week. Thanks so much for listening.